The crowd in Dusty Ford, Wyoming erupted with raucous jeers as Katherine Lawson stood trembling on the wooden auction platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that cut into her skin. The year was 1876, and the frontier town had gathered for what some called entertainment and others called business. The auctioneer, a portly man with yellowing teeth and whiskey on his breath, circled Katherine like a vulture, pointing out her features as if she were livestock. "Look at this fine specimen of womanhood, gentlemen. 22 years old, healthy as a horse, and ain't she a beauty? Perfect for warming your bed or working your kitchen." The man's voice boomed across the dusty town square as Katherine fought back tears, refusing to let these men see her break. "Starting bid is $50. The hands went up immediately, men calling out numbers that increased by tens and then 20s. Katherine's stomach churned as she surveyed the sea of leering faces, ranchers, miners, and outlaws, all eyeing her like she was a prize mare. Her journey west had ended in disaster when the stagecoach was attacked. The driver and her traveling companions were killed, but she'd been captured for this twisted auction. 120, shouted a grizzled miner with blackened teeth. 150. Countered a rancher she recognized as having a reputation for cruelty to his workers. The bidding continued climbing, and Katherine's hope diminished with each raised hand. She had come west seeking a new life after her parents' deaths left her destitute in Boston. The teaching position in Montana had seemed like salvation. Now, she was merchandise. $240, called out a man whose very presence made the crowd part like water. He was older, well-dressed, with a calculating coldness in his eyes that made Katherine's blood run cold. Thomas Decker, the wealthiest man in the territory and owner of the largest cattle operation for 100 miles. The auctioneer's eyes glittered with greed. "I hear 240. Do I hear 250? This is a bargain, gentlemen, for such quality." The crowd fell silent, many lowering their hands, unwilling to challenge Decker's bid. Katherine felt herself sway slightly with despair. She'd heard whispers about the man's ranch, about women who disappeared behind its gates. "Going once," the auctioneer called, raising his gavel. "Going twice." Just as the gavel began to fall, a deep voice cut through the square. The auction's closed. Every head turned toward the source. A tall man in trail-worn clothing stood at the edge of the crowd, his stance wide and confident. Dust clung to his leather vest and denim pants, and his face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. But there was no mistaking the glint of the star pinned to his chest, or the hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "What's that, Cowboy?" The auctioneer sputtered, his routine disrupted. The man stepped forward, the crowd parting for him as he approached the platform. Now Katherine could see him clearly, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I said the auction is closed, Wilkes." He spoke each word deliberately. "Selling human beings has been illegal in this country for more than 10 years. Or did you miss the war? Now see here, Fletcher," Decker spoke up, his voice slick with practiced authority. "This ain't no slave auction. The girl owes a debt for her rescue and transport. We're simply determining who'll pay it and take responsibility for her." The man called Fletcher X stepped onto the platform, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. He stood beside Katherine, and she could smell leather, horse, and something clean like pine soap. "That right, madam?" he asked, speaking directly to her for the first time, his eyes softening slightly. "You agree to this arrangement?" Katherine found her voice at last. "No, sir. I was traveling to Montana for a teaching position when our stagecoach was attacked. These men," she glanced toward Decker and his associates, "they killed the survivors and brought me here." Fletcher's jaw tightened as he turned back to the crowd. Sounds like kidnapping and attempted human trafficking to me." He reached for his knife and cut Catherine's bonds in one swift motion. "As deputy marshal of this territory, I'm shutting this down." Decker's face reddened with fury. "You have no authority here, X. This town knows who really runs things." "The law runs things," Fletcher countered evenly, helping Katherine down from the platform. "And the law says this woman goes free." A tense silence fell over the crowd. Katherine could feel dozens of eyes watching, calculating, wondering if this would turn violent. Fletcher spoke to the crowd without taking his eyes off Decker. "Any man who wants to challenge federal law can deal with me directly. Otherwise, this gathering is over." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, men began to disperse, muttering but unwilling to test the marshal's resolve. Only Decker remained, flanked by two hired guns who had materialized at his side. "You've made a mistake today, X," Decker said quietly. "A serious one." Fletcher stood his ground. "Not the first, won't be the last, but freeing this woman isn't one of them." Decker's cold eyes flickered to Katherine. "We'll meet again, miss." Then he turned and walked away, his men following close behind. When the square had emptied, Fletcher turned to Katherine. "Are you hurt, madam?" Katherine rubbed her chafed wrists. "Nothing that won't heal, thanks to you. I'm Katherine Lawson." "Deputy Marshal Fletcher X," he replied, "though most folks around here just call me Fletcher." "Where can I go?" she asked, suddenly aware of her precarious situation. "My belongings, my money, everything was taken." Fletcher looked thoughtful. "Town's not safe for you right now. Decker has too many men on his payroll." He glanced at the darkening sky. "I've got a small ranch about 10 miles outside town. My sister Abigail stays there too. You'd be welcome until we can arrange safe passage to Montana." Katherine hesitated. Going alone with a stranger, even one who had just saved her, presented its own risks. Reading her expression, Fletcher added, "Or I can take you to the mission house on the edge of town. Sisters there will take you in, though I can't guarantee Decker won't find you." Katherine considered her options. The determination with which Fletcher had faced down the entire town suggested a man of principle, and the mention of his sister eased her concerns. "I'd be grateful for your assistance to reach your ranch, Deputy X, at least until I can determine my next steps." Fletcher nodded, then led her to where his horse was hitched. "We'll ride double. It's not ideal, but it's getting dark, and I'd rather not spend more time in town than necessary." As Katherine allowed him to help her onto the horse, she felt the weight of stares from windows and doorways along the street. She knew her ordeal was far from over, but for the first time since the stagecoach attack, she felt a flicker of hope. Fletcher mounted behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Hold tight, Miss Lawson. The trail gets rough in places." As they rode out of Dusty Ford, Katherine couldn't help glancing back at the town that had nearly become her prison. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for stopping the auction." Fletcher's reply was simple. No decent man could have done otherwise. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's gait and the vast Wyoming landscape spreading before them. Katherine's mind raced with questions about this man who had risked himself to save a stranger. But exhaustion soon overtook her, and she found herself leaning back slightly against his chest as they traveled through the gathering dusk. Fletcher noticed her fatigue. "Rest if you can, Miss Lawson. We've still got an hour's ride ahead." Katherine nodded, grateful for his understanding. As the stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky, she allowed herself to relax slightly, wondering what tomorrow would bring and how she would rebuild her shattered plans. The ranch came into view just as full darkness settled across the land, a modest homestead nestled against a backdrop of pine trees with a small creek running nearby. A lantern burned in the window, casting a warm glow that promised safety. As they approached, the front door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "It's me, Abby," Fletcher called out. The woman lowered her rifle and peered into the darkness. "You're late, Fletcher. I was about to come looking. Had some trouble in town." He dismounted and helped Katherine down from the horse. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride. Abigail X was a few years younger than Fletcher, with the same storm-colored eyes but lighter hair pulled back in a practical braid. She took in Katherine's appearance with a quick, assessing glance. "I can see that," she said, then offered Katherine a small smile. "Come inside. You look like you could use some hot food and rest." The interior of the ranch house was modest but clean and well-ordered. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the scent of stew simmering on the stove filled the air. Katherine felt tears threatening at this simple show of normalcy after her ordeal. While Abigail set an extra place at the table, Fletcher explained the situation in brief, matter-of-fact terms. His sister's expression darkened as he described the auction. "Decker's overreaching," she said when he finished. "Even for him, this is bold." "He's always pushing boundaries," Fletcher agreed, washing trail dust from his hands in a basin. "But kidnapping and attempting to sell a woman crosses a line I can't ignore." "You shouldn't have faced him alone," Abigail chided gently. Fletcher shrugged. "Didn't have much choice." He turned to Katherine. "Miss Lawson, please sit. You must be hungry." The stew was simple but delicious, and Katherine hadn't realized how famished she was until she began eating. As the hot food restored her strength, she found her voice again and properly introduced herself. "I was a teacher in Boston," she explained. "After my parents passed last winter, I answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher in Prosperity, Montana. The stage was attacked 3 days ago, just past Cheyenne." "Prosperity," Fletcher repeated thoughtfully. "That's a good 4 days' ride from here, longer by stage." "Do you still want to go there?" Abigail asked. Katherine stared into her bowl. "I don't know. The position may be filled if I don't arrive soon, but I have no resources to get there now." "We'll figure something out," Fletcher assured her. "For now, you're welcome to stay here as long as needed." After the meal, Abigail showed Katherine to a small but clean bedroom and provided a nightgown and fresh clothing for the morning. "These might be a bit large," she apologized, "but they're clean." "You're very kind," Katherine said sincerely. "Both of you." Abigail smiled. "Get some rest." Things often look clearer in the morning light. Left alone, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up to her. The terror of the auction platform, the humiliation of being appraised like cattle, the relief when Fletcher had appeared, it all washed over her in a wave. For the first time since the stagecoach attack, she allowed herself to cry, muffling her sobs with a pillow so her hosts wouldn't hear. When her tears finally subsided, she washed her face in the basin provided, changed into the borrowed nightgown, and slipped beneath the covers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, punctuated by nightmares of grasping hands and Decker's cold eyes. Dawn broke clear and bright over the Wyoming landscape. Katherine woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation from the kitchen. She dressed quickly in the clothes Abigail had provided, a simple skirt and blouse that hung a bit loose on her frame, and ventured out to join her hosts. Fletcher was already dressed for riding, drinking coffee at the table while Abigail fried bacon and eggs at the stove. He stood when Katherine entered, a gesture of politeness that seemed automatic rather than forced. "Morning, Miss Lawson. Hope you got some rest." "As much as could be expected," Katherine replied honestly. "And please call me Katherine. Breakfast was a quiet affair, but not uncomfortably so. Afterward, Fletcher announced he needed to ride back to town. I need to file a report about yesterday's events and send telegrams to the marshal's office in Cheyenne and the school board in Prosperity. They should know what happened and that you're safe. Is it wise to go alone?" Katherine asked, concerned about Decker's threats. A smile briefly touched Fletcher's lips. "I appreciate your concern, but Decker won't try anything so soon or so openly. Besides, the law needs to know what he's been up to." After Fletcher departed, Katherine offered to help Abigail with household chores. As they worked side by side, washing dishes and sweeping floors, Abigail shared more about herself and Fletcher. "Our parents brought us west from Pennsylvania when we were children," she explained. "They had dreams of building something lasting. Pa started this ranch, and Ma taught us from books she'd brought along. They both died of fever 6 years ago within weeks of each other." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of loss. Abigail nodded. "Fletcher could have sold the ranch then, moved on. But he promised Pa he'd keep it going. He joined the marshal's service to supplement our income. The ranch doesn't yield much profit yet." "He seems very dedicated to justice," Katherine observed. A fond smile touched Abigail's face. "Always has been, even as a boy. He can't abide seeing anyone mistreated. Gets him in trouble sometimes." By midday, they had moved to the porch where Abigail was showing Katherine how to mend harness leather, a skill never taught in Boston finishing schools but essential on the frontier. The rhythmic work was soothing, and Katherine found herself relaxing for the first time in days. "Tell me about your teaching," Abigail said. "What subjects do you favor?" "Literature and history," Katherine replied, her face brightening. "Though I enjoy mathematics as well. In Boston, I taught at a small private school, mostly girls from good families." She paused. "I imagine teaching here in the West would be quite different." "Different, yes, but perhaps more rewarding in some ways. These children hunger for knowledge they can't get elsewhere. Many of their parents can't read themselves." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, several of them. Abigail stood quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that rested against the porch wall. 3 riders came into view, and Katherine's blood ran cold as she recognized Thomas Decker in the lead, flanked by 2 men with guns visible on their hips. "Get inside," Abigail whispered urgently. "Lock the door and don't come out no matter what you hear." "I won't leave you alone with them," Katherine protested. "I've dealt with Decker before," Abigail assured her. "Go. Now." Reluctantly, Katherine retreated inside, but she remained near the window where she could see and hear the confrontation. Decker reined in his horse before the porch, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Miss X, looking lovely as always." Abigail stood her ground, rifle held casually but ready. "What brings you to our property, Mr. Decker?" "Just being neighborly," he replied with a cold smile. "Heard your brother took in a stray yesterday. Thought I'd check if you needed any assistance." "We're managing just fine." Decker dismounted, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Now, I think we both know that woman rightfully belongs to me. I won the auction fair and square before your brother's untimely interruption." "There was nothing fair or square about kidnapping a woman and trying to sell her," Abigail replied, her voice steady. "And people aren't property to be owned, Mr. Decker." One of Decker's men snickered, but fell silent at a glance from his employer. "I paid good money to have her retrieved from that stagecoach wreckage," Decker said, his facade of civility beginning to crack. "Your brother has cost me both my investment and my purchase." "The law calls that kidnapping and attempted human trafficking," Abigail countered, "and the law is on our side." Decker's smile vanished entirely. The law in these parts is whatever I say it is, girl. Your brother seems to have forgotten that. He stepped closer to the porch. Now, I'm going to take what's mine and you're going to step aside. Abigail raised the rifle, aiming squarely at Decker's chest. Not another step. From her position at the window, Katherine watched in horror as the tension built. Decker's men had their hands hovering near their guns, and Abigail was terribly outnumbered. Without conscious thought, Katherine moved to the gun cabinet Fletcher had shown her the night before, just in case. Inside was a shotgun, loaded and ready. Taking it with trembling hands, she returned to the door and stepped onto the porch beside Abigail. "Mr. Decker," she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "I believe Deputy Marshal X made it clear yesterday that I am not and will never be your property." Decker's cold eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl, but Katherine forced herself to stand tall, the shotgun held firmly in her hands. "You're making a mistake, girl," he said softly. "I can offer you comfort, protection, a life of luxury. What can this deputy and his sister give you except a life of hardship?" "They've given me dignity and freedom," Katherine replied, "something you can't comprehend the value of." For a long moment no one moved. Then Decker laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "You've got spirit. I'll enjoy breaking it." He turned back to his men. "We're leaving. For now." As they mounted their horses, Decker called back, "Tell your brother I'll be waiting for him in town. This isn't over, not by a long shot." They watched in tense silence as the three riders disappeared down the trail. Only when they were out of sight did Abigail lower her rifle and turn to Katherine with a mixture of exasperation and respect. That was either very brave or very foolish. Katherine's hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. "Perhaps both. I couldn't let you face them alone." Abigail took the shotgun gently from Katherine's hands. "Fletcher's not going to like that Decker came here. We need to warn him," Katherine said urgently. "Decker threatened him directly." "Fletcher can handle himself," Abigail assured her, though worry creased her brow. "But you're right. We should go to town." Within the hour, they were in the wagon heading toward Dusty Ford. Abigail had insisted they both change into more practical clothing, split skirts that allowed for easier movement, and riding boots. They each carried a weapon, Katherine the shotgun and Abigail her rifle, both hidden under blankets in the wagon bed. "Normally, I wouldn't bring a city woman like you into potential trouble," Abigail explained as they traveled. "But I can't leave you alone at the ranch, and you've already proven you can keep your head. I may have been raised in Boston, but my father believed women should know how to protect themselves. He taught me to shoot when I was 16, Katherine replied, omitting that her practice had been limited to target shooting at a controlled range, nothing like the confrontation on the porch. The town appeared different in daylight than it had during the auction, smaller, somehow, and less threatening. Still, Katherine felt eyes following them as Abigail guided the wagon down the main street toward the marshal's office. Fletcher looked up in surprise when they entered, his expression quickly shifting to concern. "What happened?" he asked, rising from his desk. Abigail explained about Decker's visit while Fletcher's face darkened with each detail. "I should have anticipated this," he muttered. "I've already telegraphed the federal marshal's office, but it will take days for additional deputies to arrive." "What do we do in the meantime?" Katherine asked. Fletcher considered for a moment. "We need to get you somewhere safer than my ranch. Decker knows exactly where to find you there." "The Mission House," Abigail began. "No," Fletcher interrupted. "Too obvious, and the sisters can't protect her if Decker brings men." "Then where?" Fletcher opened a drawer and pulled out a map, spreading it on his desk. "There's a mining settlement about 40 miles north in the mountains." "Silverton." Friend of mine named Harris runs the general store there. Decker has no influence that far out. 40 miles is at least 2 days' travel through difficult country, Abigail pointed out. Yes, but once she's there, she'll be safe until the federal marshals arrive. Then we can arrange proper escort to Montana or wherever she decides to go. Katherine looked between the siblings. I won't run and hide while you two face danger because of me. Fletcher met her eyes directly. Miss Lawson, Katherine, this isn't just about you anymore. Decker's been pushing boundaries for years, bullying smaller ranchers, corrupting local officials. What he tried to do to you is the worst yet, but it's part of a pattern. If we don't stand against him now, who knows what he'll try next? His words resonated with Katherine's sense of justice. Then let me help somehow. You can help by staying alive and testifying when the time comes, Fletcher said firmly. Your word as an educated, respectable woman from back east will carry weight with federal authorities. Before Katherine could argue further, the office door burst open. A young boy of perhaps 12 years stood panting in the doorway. Deputy X. They're burning the Wung place. Decker's men. Fletcher grabbed his hat and gun belt. How many? 4 or 5, the boy gasped. They got torches and they're threatening to burn the whole family out. Fletcher turned to Abigail. Take Katherine back to the ranch. Pack what you can carry on horseback and head for Silverton tonight. Don't wait for me. Fletcher, Abigail began, but he was already moving toward the door. I'll catch up when I can. He paused, looking back at Katherine. Stay safe. Then he was gone, running down the street with the boy leading the way. Through the window, Katherine could see smoke rising from the edge of town. Who are the Wungs? She asked. Chinese family, Abigail explained, gathering up the map Fletcher had left. They run a laundry. Lee Wung refused to sell his property to Decker last month. It sits on a spring Decker wants for his cattle. And Decker is using the chaos he's created to attack them, Katherine realized. He's trying to divide Fletcher's attention. Abigail nodded grimly. And it's working. She checked her rifle. We need to leave town now before Decker realizes we're here. They moved quickly to the wagon, but as they prepared to depart, Katherine noticed a group of men gathering outside the saloon across the street. Among them was Thomas Decker himself, watching the smoke rise with a satisfied expression. When he spotted Katherine, he raised his glass in a mock toast. He's not even hiding his involvement, Katherine said with disgust. He doesn't need to, Abigail replied tightly. Half the town is in his pocket and the other half is too afraid to speak against him. She flicked the reins. Keep your head down. We're leaving. As they traveled the road back to the ranch, Katherine's mind raced. Fletcher was outnumbered and likely heading into a trap while she and Abigail were fleeing. It didn't sit right with her. We can't just leave him, she said finally. Abigail's grip on the reins tightened. I don't like it either, but Fletcher knows what he's doing. He's been handling Decker for years. But never when Decker was this bold or desperate, Katherine countered. This is different. They rode in silence for several minutes before Abigail spoke again. What are you suggesting? That we ride into a potential gunfight, Katherine thought carefully. No, but perhaps we can even the odds another way. By the time they reached the ranch, Katherine had outlined her idea. It was risky, but Abigail reluctantly agreed it might work. Fletcher will be furious, she warned as they hastily packed supplies. Only if we fail, Katherine replied with more confidence than she felt. Instead of heading north toward Silverton as Fletcher had instructed, they rode back toward town by a different route, circling around to approach from the east where the Wung family's laundry was located. As they neared, they could see flames and hear shouting. Leaving the wagon hidden among trees, they crept closer on foot until they could see the scene. The laundry building was partially ablaze, with a Chinese family mother, Father and 3 children huddled together as Decker's men surrounded them. Fletcher stood between them, his gun drawn but clearly outnumbered by the 5 armed men facing him. "Law doesn't protect Chinese, X," one of Decker's men was saying. "You're overreaching your authority again." "The law protects everyone in this territory," Fletcher replied evenly. "Now back away and let these people be." From their vantage point, Katherine and Abigail could see what Fletcher couldn't. 2 more of Decker's men approaching from behind, using the smoke as cover. "We need to warn him," Katherine whispered. Abigail nodded, raising her rifle. "On my signal, fire the shotgun into the air. It will distract them long enough for Fletcher to see the danger." Katherine's heart pounded as she readied the shotgun. Abigail took careful aim at one of the men sneaking up on Fletcher. "Now," Katherine fired into the air, the blast echoing across the property. Simultaneously, Abigail's rifle cracked, and one of the sneaking men cried out, clutching his shoulder. Fletcher spun around, immediately understanding the situation and diving for cover as Decker's men opened fire. In the confusion, the Wang family managed to retreat to a stone storage building nearby, while Fletcher returned fire from behind a water trough. "We need to get closer," Abigail said. "He's still outnumbered." They worked their way around the perimeter, using smoke and growing darkness as cover. Katherine's city upbringing had never prepared her for anything like this, but determination kept her moving forward. When they were within earshot, Abigail called out, "Fletcher, east side by the big oak." Fletcher's head turned slightly, acknowledging he'd heard without exposing himself further. With practiced precision, he fired twice toward the men who had been sneaking up on him, forcing them to retreat. "What the hell are you doing here?" he shouted when there was a break in the gunfire. "Evening the odds," Abigail called back. The standoff continued for several more minutes, neither side gaining advantage. Then Katherine noticed movement near the main road, several townspeople approaching, some with firearms. "More trouble," she warned Abigail. But to their surprise, the newcomers took positions behind Decker's men, effectively surrounding them. "Decker's men only," called a voice Katherine recognized as belonging to the shopkeeper from across the street from the marshal's office. "We want no trouble with you, Deputy X, but this has gone far enough." The tide had turned. Realizing they were now outnumbered and surrounded, Decker's men slowly lowered their weapons. Fletcher stood cautiously. "Where's Decker?" "Still at the saloon," one of the townspeople replied. "Too cowardly to do his own dirty work." With the immediate danger past, Katherine and Abigail emerged from their position to join Fletcher. His expression upon seeing Katherine was a mixture of relief and frustration. "I told you to head for Silverton." "You're welcome," Abigail replied dryly. While Fletcher and the townspeople secured Decker's men, Katherine went to check on the Wang family. Despite the language barrier, the gratitude in Mrs. Wang's eyes needed no translation as Katherine helped tend to a burn on one of the children's arms. As the situation calmed, more townspeople arrived to help extinguish the fire and offer support to the Wang family. Something had shifted in Dusty Ford. Decker's latest actions had finally pushed too far. Fletcher approached Katherine as she finished bandaging the child's arm. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said, unconsciously echoing his sister's earlier words. Katherine offered a tired smile. "I believe your sister already covered that assessment." His expression softened. "Thank you for coming back. I couldn't leave, knowing you were walking into danger partly because of me." Before Fletcher could respond, a commotion near the road drew their attention. Thomas Decker had arrived on horseback, flanked by several more men. Seeing his original group disarmed and surrounded by townspeople, he reined in sharply. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded. Fletcher stepped forward. "Thomas Decker, you're under arrest for attempted arson, assault, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping and human trafficking." Decker laughed. "You've lost your mind, X. I'm nowhere near these unfortunate events." "We have witnesses who will testify you ordered the attack," Fletcher replied calmly. "And Miss Lawson's testimony about her kidnapping and attempted sale will interest federal authorities greatly." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Decker's face as he noticed Katherine standing among the townspeople, her chin raised defiantly. "You think anyone will take a woman's word over mine?" he scoffed, but his confidence seemed forced now. "I think they'll take her word, the Wang family's word, and the word of half the town who's finally tired of your tyranny," Fletcher countered. "The telegraph I sent this morning reached Cheyenne. Federal marshals are already on their way." Decker's expression hardened. His hand moved toward his gun. "I've built everything in this territory. No one takes it from me." "Don't," Fletcher warned, his own hand hovering near his holster. For a tense moment, Katherine was certain violence would erupt again. Then, surprisingly, it was Mr. Wang who stepped forward, speaking in accented but clear English. "My family came to America for better life. Work hard, follow laws. You think you above law, Mr. Decker. No man above law in America. That what make America." A murmur of agreement ran through the gathered townspeople. Decker looked around, realizing for the first time that he was losing control not just of the situation but of the town itself. "This isn't over," he said finally, turning his horse. "Not by a long shot." "Actually, it is," came a new voice from the road. 3 riders approached, their badges catching the light of the setting sun. The lead rider, a gray-haired man with a weathered face, nodded to Fletcher. "Got your telegraph, Deputy. Seems we arrived just in time for the excitement." Fletcher's relief was visible. "Marshal Thompson, didn't expect you until tomorrow at earliest." "Rode through the night when we heard what was happening," Thompson replied, his gaze fixed on Decker. "Thomas Decker. Been hearing your name for some time now, none of it good." Surrounded and outmaneuvered, Decker finally surrendered without further resistance. As the marshals took him and his men into custody, Katherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The nightmare that had begun with the stagecoach attack was finally ending. The next few days passed in a blur of statements and testimonies. Katherine told her story multiple times to Marshal Thompson, to a judge who rode in from the territorial capital, to a newspaper reporter eager for details. The evidence against Decker mounted as more people came forward with accounts of threats, intimidation, and corruption once they were assured of federal protection. Through it all, Fletcher remained a steady presence, ensuring Katherine's safety and comfort. They spoke often during breaks in the proceedings, their conversations gradually expanding beyond the case to their backgrounds, hopes, and perspectives. "What will you do now?" Fletcher asked her on the 3rd evening as they sat on the porch of his ranch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in vivid oranges and purples. Abigail had tactfully excused herself to check on the horses, leaving them alone. "I'm not sure," Katherine admitted. "The teaching position in Montana has likely been filled by now. The school here in Dusty Ford needs a teacher," Fletcher suggested. "The last one left 6 months ago, and the children have had no formal education since." Katherine looked surprised. "Here, after everything that happened." "Because of everything that happened," Fletcher clarified. "This town is changing, Katherine. What Decker did, what he tried to do to you, it woke people up. They want something better." Katherine considered the idea. The thought of staying in Dusty Ford would have terrified her just days ago. Now it held an unexpected appeal. Would I be safe? Decker still has supporters. Decker will be in federal prison for years, Fletcher assured her. And yes, you'd be safe. I'd make sure of it. He hesitated, then added more softly, if you wanted to stay. Katherine studied his face, the strong lines softened by the fading light. The storm-gray eyes that had shown such fierce determination during the confrontation with Decker, and now held something gentler as they met hers. Are you asking me to stay for the town's sake, Deputy X, or for another reason? A smile touched his lips. Both, if I'm being honest. The town needs a teacher, and I. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I find I've grown rather fond of your company, Miss Lawson. Katherine, she corrected gently. Katherine, he echoed, her name sounding different in his deep voice. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, with a boldness that surprised her, Katherine reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. I think I might like to stay in Dusty Ford, at least for a while. Fletcher's hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. I'm glad to hear it. 2 months passed, bringing change to both Dusty Ford and Katherine's life. The schoolhouse, unused for half a year, had been cleaned and repaired by willing townspeople. 22 children of varying ages now filled its benches each day, their eager faces making every challenge worthwhile. Katherine had taken rooms above the dressmaker's shop in town, a comfortable arrangement that provided both independence and community. Mrs. Parker, the dressmaker, had quickly become a friend and valuable source of local knowledge. Fletcher visited often, sometimes on official business but increasingly for personal reasons. Their courtship progressed slowly but steadily, each discovering in the other qualities they admired and complemented their own. On a crisp autumn Saturday, Fletcher invited Katherine for a ride to a special location he wanted to show her. They traveled for an hour, climbing gentle slopes, until they reached a high meadow overlooking the valley, where Dusty Ford nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. This is breathtaking, Katherine said as they dismounted. The aspens surrounding the meadow had turned golden with the season, their leaves shimmering in the gentle breeze. Found this place my first year here, Fletcher explained, spreading a blanket for their picnic. I come here to think sometimes. As they shared the meal, Abigail had prepared fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. Katherine found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that terrible day on the auction platform. I never thanked you properly, she said suddenly. Fletcher looked puzzled. For what? For saying those words that day. The auction's closed. You could have simply reported what you saw afterward. Instead, you stepped forward, not knowing what would happen. I knew exactly what would happen, he corrected with a slight smile. I'd stop something unconscionable and likely make an enemy. Seemed a fair trade, Katherine laughed. You make it sound so simple. Some things are simple, Fletcher replied, his expression growing more serious. Right and wrong, justice and injustice. He paused, then added more softly, love and indifference. The word hung between them, significant and new. They had spoken of affection, of growing feelings, but neither had yet used this particular term. Love, Katherine echoed, her heart quickening. Fletcher met her gaze steadily. Yes, love. I love you, Katherine Lawson. I think I began falling in love with you that first day when you stood on that platform with your head high despite your fear. Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. I love you too, Fletcher. I never expected to find love here of all places after everything that happened, but perhaps that's how it works, light shining brightest against darkness. He took her hands in his. I'm not a wealthy man. The ranch barely breaks even most years. As a deputy, I face dangers regularly. I can't offer you the comforts you might have had in Boston. I don't want comforts, Katherine said firmly. I want purpose, meaning, and love. She squeezed his hands. "I've found all three here." Fletcher reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Then perhaps you'll consider one more change to your life." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond that caught the autumn sunlight. "Katherine Lawson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy blossomed in Catherine's chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Fletcher X." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her a gentle kiss that deepened as she responded, her arms encircling his neck as his went around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this when I walked into that auction." Katherine smiled. "Nor did I, but I'm eternally grateful you did." They were married on the first snowfall of winter, a December day when crystalline flakes dusted Dusty Ford like sugar. The small church was filled with townspeople, including the Wang family, who had presented them with an exquisitely embroidered tablecloth as a wedding gift. Abigail stood as Catherine's maid of honor, having become not just a friend but the sister Catherine had never had. Marshal Thompson returned for the occasion, standing as Fletcher's best man and bringing news that Decker's conviction had been upheld by territorial courts. Catherine wore a dress of ivory satin that Mrs. Parker had labored over for weeks, insisting it was her gift to the teacher who had given her granddaughter a love of reading. Fletcher wore a new suit, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the formal attire, but handsome nonetheless. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, spoken with clear voices that carried to every corner of the church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation reflected not just joy for the couple but celebration of the new beginning their union represented for the town itself. The reception was held at the hotel dining room, transformed with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the occasion. There was dancing, feasting, and much laughter as the community that had come together in crisis now united in celebration. As evening approached, Fletcher and Catherine slipped away to the ranch that would now be their home together. Abigail had arranged to stay in town with friends for a few days, giving the newlyweds privacy as they began their married life. The ranch house had been transformed as well. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a wedding gift from the dressmaker. New quilts adorned the beds, including the one that would now be theirs together. In the hearth, a welcoming fire crackled, warding off the winter chill. "Welcome home, Mrs. X," Fletcher said softly as they crossed the threshold, his arm around her waist. "Home," Catherine repeated, savoring the word. "I never thought I'd find one so far from where I began." "Are you happy with where life has brought you?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Catherine turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. What began as the worst day of my life became the path to the best." His eyes darkened with emotion. "I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "And I, you," she whispered before their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promises and began their future. Spring came to Wyoming with a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. Catherine's school flourished, with enrollment growing as families from outlying ranches sent their children to learn from the teacher, whose reputation for both kindness and firmness had spread throughout the county. Fletcher continued his work as deputy marshal, though the nature of his duties had changed since Decker's downfall. With the most corrupting influence removed, law enforcement focused more on community building than confrontation. He still rode circuit regularly, but always returned to Catherine with stories and a hunger for her presence that never diminished. Together, they worked to improve the ranch, adding chickens and a milk cow, expanding the garden and planning for the future. Abigail remained with them for a time, but by summer, she had accepted a marriage proposal from the young doctor who had arrived in Dusty Ford that spring, moving to her own new beginning. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching twilight settle over their land, Katherine took Fletcher's hand and placed it gently over her abdomen. "We'll need to prepare the small bedroom," she said softly. "By next spring, we'll have use for it." Fletcher's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Are you certain?" Katherine nodded, her smile radiant. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a child, Fletcher." Joy transformed his face as he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious treasure. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." Their baby boy, James Fletcher X, was born on a mild April day with his father's storm-gray eyes and his mother's determination. From his first cry, he was the center of their world, bringing new dimension to the love they shared. As Katherine nursed him in the rocking chair Fletcher had crafted during the winter evenings of her pregnancy, she often reflected on the strange path that had led her to this contentment. From the terror of the auction platform to the peace of this home, from being valued as property to being cherished as a partner and mother, the journey seemed almost impossible when viewed in its entirety. Yet here she was, with a husband who looked at her each day as if seeing her anew, a son who represented their shared future, and a community that had transformed itself from a place of fear to one of possibility. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher asked one evening, finding her on the porch with James sleeping against her shoulder, her expression contemplative. "About all the turns that brought us here," she answered honestly. "How the worst moments can lead to the greatest joys." He sat beside her, his arm sliding naturally around her waist. "Any regrets?" Katherine leaned into his embrace, their son nestled between them. "Not one," she said with absolute certainty. "Every step, even the painful ones, led exactly where I was meant to be." As the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in familiar glory, Katherine Lawson X knew that the auction that had closed that day 2 years ago had opened the door to everything she truly needed: love, purpose, family, and a home not defined by walls but by the hearts that dwelled within it. 3 years later, their daughter Sarah Abigail X joined the family, bringing with her a sunny disposition and her mother's auburn hair. The ranch prospered under Fletcher's careful management, and Katherine's school became known throughout the territory for its excellence. Dusty Ford itself transformed gradually from a rough frontier outpost to a growing community with aspirations beyond survival. Katherine often thought about how places, like people, could change when given the chance to become their better selves. On the 5th anniversary of what they jokingly called their auction day meeting, Fletcher presented Katherine with a deed the land adjacent to their ranch, expanding their property significantly. "For our children's future," he explained. "And maybe for a bigger school someday if you want it." Katherine's vision of a proper academy had been a frequent topic of their conversations, a place where children from across the territory could receive education regardless of background or circumstances. "You believe in my dreams so completely," she said, touched by his gift. Fletcher smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening with the expression. "Your dreams become mine, just as mine become yours. That's what partnership means." As their family and aspirations grew, so did their love, not with the desperate intensity of new passion but with the steady, unshakable strength of deep roots. Each challenge they faced, they met together. Each joy they experienced was multiplied by sharing. The auction platform where they first met was eventually dismantled, the wood repurposed to build a bandstand in the town square where community gatherings and celebrations were held. Katherine found it fitting that something once used for such a terrible purpose had been transformed into a place of music and unity. Sometimes, when Fletcher didn't know she was watching, Katherine would observe him with their children teaching James to ride, reading to Sarah in the evening, answering their endless questions with patience and wisdom. In those moments, her heart would swell with gratitude for the man who had said those 3 simple words that changed everything. The auction's closed. 3 words that had closed one door and opened another, leading to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined that terrifying day. 3 words that had begun their story, a story of redemption, transformation, and love that grew stronger with each passing season. And in the quiet moments when the children were asleep and they sat together watching the stars emerge over the Wyoming landscape they both now called home, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that some auctions were meant to be closed so that hearts could be opened forever.